The moon goddess chose her. The Alpha King refused her. For 23 years, Nerissa Vale had dreamed of this night. Not because she longed for a crown, not because she wished to rule. She simply wanted one person who would look at her and choose her without hesitation. The moon court shimmered beneath thousands of silver lanterns, as wolves from every corner of the kingdom gathered for the annual moon ceremony. Nerissa stood among them, her heart pounding. The High Elder raised the sacred moonstone toward the sky. May the moon goddess reveal the bonds written before birth. A soft silver light spread across the courtyard. One by one, glowing threads appeared between destined mates. Laughter, tears, joyful embraces. Then the brightest bond of all burst into existence. A radiant silver thread stretched from Nerissa's heart, straight to the Alpha King. A gasp swept through the court. His Majesty has found his mate. The moon goddess has chosen our future queen. Nerissa's breath caught. Across the courtyard stood Darian Ashcroft, tall, calm, powerful. His silver eyes met hers. For one beautiful heartbeat, the world disappeared. She smiled. He didn't. Instead, Darian took one slow step backward. Confusion rippled through the crowd. Another step. Then he lifted his head and spoke with a voice that carried across the silent courtyard. I reject this bond. The words struck harder than any blade. The glowing thread between them shuddered violently. Pain exploded through Nerissa's chest as though her heart itself had been torn apart. She staggered, but refused to fall. Around her, whispers spread like wildfire. He rejected his fated mate. That's impossible. No Alpha King has ever done such a thing. Nerissa looked at Darian, desperate to understand. She searched his face for disgust, for anger, for cruelty. She found none of them, only unbearable exhaustion. His eyes held a sorrow so deep it almost mirrored her own. Before anyone could speak again, Darian's voice softened. I alone will bear the punishment for this choice. The High Elder stared in disbelief. Your Majesty, the moon goddess herself has blessed this union. Darian lowered his gaze. I know, and I accept every consequence. The court erupted into stunned arguments. Some nobles demanded an explanation. Others called the rejection blasphemy. Through it all, Nerissa heard nothing except the echo of the words that had shattered her dreams. I reject this bond. As she turned away, one face caught her attention, the Queen Mother. While everyone else looked horrified, the older woman's lips curved into the faintest smile. It vanished almost instantly. So quickly that anyone else might have missed it. Nerissa didn't. With the last of her strength, she slipped quietly from the palace before anyone thought to stop her. Behind her, the moon court dissolved into chaos. Ahead of her lay only darkness. Before sunrise, she would leave the capital behind. She believed she was running from the man who had broken her heart. She had no idea that another Alpha was already riding toward the road that would change her life forever. Nerissa rode through the night without looking back. The palace lights disappeared behind the mountains, swallowed by darkness. She welcomed it. Every mile placed more distance between herself and the moment her heart had shattered before an entire kingdom. The bond still ached. It wasn't the sharp agony she had felt during the ceremony. Now it was quieter, a constant ache beneath every breath. Just before dawn, her mare stumbled. The exhausted animal struggled forward for a few more steps before collapsing beside an old forest road. Nerissa immediately jumped down. No, easy. She loosened the saddle and tried to calm the frightened horse, whose leg had become tangled beneath the harness. It's all right, she whispered, stroking its neck. We'll figure this out. She pulled with all her strength. The leather wouldn't budge. Hoofbeats echoed through the silent forest. Instinctively, Nerissa stepped in front of her horse. A lone rider emerged from the mist. He wore no royal colors, only a weathered gray cloak fastened with a simple silver clasp. His wolf scent reached her before he spoke. Alpha. The stranger slowed his horse and dismounted without a word. Instead of asking questions, he knelt beside the trapped mare. She's frightened, he said calmly. If we rush her, she'll only struggle harder. His voice carried an easy confidence that settled both horse and woman alike. He gently covered the mare's eyes with his cloak. There, he murmured. Now she can't see what she's afraid of. Together, they loosened the twisted harness until the horse finally pulled its leg free. The mare stood shakily, but remained calm. Nerissa exhaled in relief. Thank you. The stranger smiled. It was nothing. Only then did he truly look at her. His silver eyes widened. Not with recognition, with realization. The moon goddess, he said quietly. You're his mate. The words pierced the silence. Nerissa lowered her gaze. I was. The Alpha shook his head. No, you still are. She gave a sad smile. It doesn't feel that way. He didn't argue. He simply accepted her answer. After a moment, he placed a small water skin in her hands. You look like you haven't stopped since yesterday. She hadn't. My name is Rowan Thorn, he said. I lead the Silver Ridge Pack. Nerissa recognized the name. His pack had long been known for keeping peace along the western borders. I know who you are, she replied softly. Rowan nodded once, then asked the one question no one else had thought to ask. Where do you want to go? She blinked. No one had offered her a choice since the bond appeared. Not the elders. Not the court. Not even Darien. She looked down the endless forest road. I don't know. That's all right, Rowan said gently. You don't have to decide today. He mounted his horse and extended a hand, not to pull her toward him, but to help her back onto her own mare. My pack has room for travelers. You may stay as long as you need. No expectations. No questions. Only a place to breathe. For the first time since the moon ceremony, Nerissa felt something other than grief. Not hope. Not yet. But safety. As the sun finally rose above the trees, they rode west together. Far behind them, the capital was already preparing for a wedding that had never been about love demi. The Moon Palace celebrated before the sun had fully risen. Musicians filled the grand hall. Servants hurried through marble corridors carrying flowers and silver trays. To anyone looking from the outside, it appeared the kingdom had escaped disaster. Inside the throne room, Darien stood alone before the great windows. He had not slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Nerissa's face as the bond shattered. A quiet knock broke the silence. The council is waiting, Your Majesty, a servant announced. Darien nodded without turning. I'll be there. When he entered the council chamber, the Queen Mother was already seated at the head of the table. A satisfied smile touched her lips. The ceremony is behind us, she said. Now we may proceed. One noble unfurled a scroll. The Eastern Alliance has accepted the proposal. Their Alpha's daughter will arrive within 2 weeks. Another counselor smiled. The border will remain secure. Darien's voice was flat. There will be no celebration. The Queen Mother folded her hands. There will be exactly what the kingdom requires. She rose and walked toward an ancient map hanging on the wall. Years of fading ink marked the eastern border. 26 years ago, she said, your father signed a treaty with the Eastern Alliance. She tapped the map. If the ruling Alpha made it outside the alliance without royal approval, 12,000 warriors stationed along this border would march. The kingdom would face war before winter. The room fell silent. Several younger nobles looked uneasy. Darien already knew every word. He had spent years carrying the weight of that agreement. I chose the kingdom, he said quietly. You chose correctly, the Queen Mother replied. But you made one mistake. He looked at her. You hesitated. For the first time, emotion cracked through his calm expression. I loved her. The confession hung in the room like a prayer no one wished to answer. I loved her before I even knew she was my mate. One counselor lowered his eyes. Another shifted uncomfortably. The Queen Mother's face remained unchanged. Love is a luxury, she said. A king survives by duty. Darien closed his eyes. I could have told her the truth, and burdened her with impossible choices, the Queen Mother asked. You spared her. He wanted to believe that. He truly did. If Nerissa hated him, perhaps she would move on. Perhaps she would build a happier life far away from palace politics. It was the only comfort he allowed himself. Miles away, Nerissa and Rowan reached the rolling hills of Silver Ridge. The pack welcomed her with warm bread, quiet smiles, and simple guest quarters overlooking a peaceful valley. No one bowed. No one whispered. No one called her the rejected Luna. As Rowan showed her the small cottage where she could rest, he stopped at the doorway. If you need anything, he said, just ask. He smiled kindly. And if you need nothing, that's perfectly all right too. For the first time since the moon ceremony, Nerissa felt the tightness in her chest begin, ever so slightly, to loosen. Neither of them knew that the greatest lie in the kingdom had only just begun to unravel. Days turned into weeks. Then weeks became a month. Life in Silver Ridge moved at a slower pace than the royal capital. The mornings began with shared breakfasts in the village square. The afternoons were spent repairing fences, tending fields, or helping neighbors prepare for winter. No one treated Nerissa like a fallen queen. They simply treated her like another member of the community. She found herself smiling again. Not often, but enough to remember what it felt like. When Rowan noticed her lingering by the herb gardens one morning, he handed her a basket. "We're short on lavender." She blinked. "You want me to gather herbs?" He shrugged. "I want your help. If you'd rather do something else, that's fine too." There it was again. A choice. She accepted the basket with a grateful smile. Rumors, however, traveled much faster than healing. Merchants passing through the village whispered the same story. "The rejected Luna has already found another alpha. They'll announce a new bond before winter. Perhaps Silver Ridge will challenge the Moon Kingdom." Nerissa tried to ignore the gossip. Rowan never mentioned it. One evening, after the day's work was done, Beta Cassian found Rowan repairing the roof of an elderly widow's cottage. Cassian crossed his arms. "The whole kingdom thinks she's your future mate." Rowan kept hammering a loose wooden plank into place. "People enjoy guessing. They're asking why you haven't claimed her." That finally made Rowan pause. He rested the hammer against his shoulder. "Claimed her?" Cassian nodded. "The moon bond between her and Darien is damaged. Many alphas would see this as an opportunity." Rowan climbed down from the roof. His expression was calm, but his voice carried quiet conviction. "She's grieving. Loneliness isn't permission." Cassian said nothing. Rowan continued. "She has spent weeks wondering whether she was rejected because she wasn't enough. The last thing she needs is another alpha deciding what her future should be." He looked toward the fields where Nerissa laughed with a group of village children as they chased butterflies through the tall grass. "If she ever loves again, I want it to be because she chose freely, not because she felt indebted, not because she was afraid of being alone, not because fate pushed her toward someone new." Cassian followed his gaze. A slow smile spread across his face. "I understand." That evening, Nerissa sat beside a small bonfire while the villagers shared stories beneath the stars. For the first time in months, she laughed without forcing it. Rowan watched from across the fire. He didn't interrupt. He didn't sit beside her unless invited. He simply smiled, content to see her healing. Far to the east, dark clouds gathered above the border. Messengers galloped between fortresses, carrying urgent reports. The Eastern Alliance had begun moving soldiers toward the frontier. The treaty that had cost Nerissa her happiness was about to prove worthless. The first warning came at dawn. A messenger rode into the Moon Palace with his horse lathered in sweat. He dropped to one knee before the throne. "Your Majesty, the Eastern Alliance has crossed the border." The council chamber exploded into confusion. "That can't be possible. The treaty should still be protecting us. They've broken their word." Darien rose from the throne, his face unreadable. "No." He looked toward the eastern windows. Either they never intended to honor the treaty, or someone made certain it would fail. Within hours, villages along the frontier were under attack. Royal wolves rushed to defend the border, while frightened families fled toward safer ground. Darien rode beside his soldiers, but every battlefield reminded him of one painful truth. Nerissa had suffered for this. He had shattered her heart believing he was preventing exactly this war. When the fighting finally eased, Captain Elias, commander of the Royal Intelligence Corps, arrived with a sealed chest recovered from the estate of a recently arrested noble. Inside were dozens of letters, secret contracts, hidden ledgers, payments exchanged between members of the Royal Council, and merchants supplying weapons to both sides of the conflict. The room fell silent as Elias unfolded the final document. "It appears the treaty was broken years ago," he said. "The border commanders were secretly bribed to ignore its terms." Another letter bore the Queen Mother's royal seal. Darien stared at it in disbelief. His hands trembled as he read. The treaty had already become worthless. The Eastern Alliance had never intended to keep peace. Certain nobles had prolonged the illusion because endless military contracts filled their coffers with gold. Then came the final revelation. Captain Elias lowered his voice. "There is one more confession." He placed another letter before the king. The Queen Mother knew. The words struck harder than any sword. She had known the treaty could no longer protect the kingdom. She had known Nerissa's rejection would accomplish nothing. Her true reason had been painfully simple. She believed a common-born woman was unworthy of becoming queen. The lie had never been about politics. It had been about pride. When confronted before the Council of Elders, the Queen Mother offered no defense. She merely lifted her chin. "I acted for the dignity of the throne." "No," Darian answered quietly. "You acted for your own prejudice." By unanimous judgment, she was stripped of every royal title. Instead of imprisonment in luxury, she was sentenced to spend the remainder of her life serving in the kingdom's orphanages, feeding, teaching, and caring for the children whose futures her ambition had nearly destroyed. As the council dispersed, Darian remained alone in the empty hall. He looked at the moonlight spilling across the throne room floor. Everything he had sacrificed, everything Nerissa had endured, had been for a lie. He whispered into the silence, "I asked you to hate me so you could be safe." His voice broke. "And I wasn't even able to give you that." The next morning, he saddled his horse. Not as a king chasing his mate, but as a man determined to face the woman he had failed, and finally tell her the truth. Darian crossed 3 kingdoms before he found her. Not in a palace, not hidden behind the walls of another Alpha's fortress. He found Nerissa in a small border village, sleeves rolled to her elbows, helping rebuild homes damaged during the recent war. Children laughed as they carried baskets of stones. Carpenters repaired roofs. Farmers worked beside wolves from different packs, without caring who had once stood on opposite sides of the battlefield. Nerissa knelt beside an elderly woman, carefully bandaging an injured hand. When she finished, she looked up. Their eyes met. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Darian stepped forward slowly. "I've been looking for you." "I know," Nerissa replied. Her voice was calm, not cold, not welcoming, simply calm. Rowan approached from the nearby worksite, carrying a stack of timber on one shoulder. He paused when he saw Darian. The 2 Alphas regarded one another in silence. No growls, no challenge, only mutual understanding. "I'll give you some privacy," Rowan said. He set the timber down and walked away without another word. Darian watched him go. "He has treated you well." "He treated me like a person," Nerissa answered. "He never treated me like something to win." The words settled heavily between them. Darian lowered his gaze. "You know the truth." She nodded. "I know about the treaty. I know about your mother. I know you believed you were protecting the kingdom." Hope flickered in his eyes. "Then, will you come home?" Nerissa looked toward the half-built homes surrounding them. Villagers from different packs worked side by side, rebuilding lives instead of arguing over old loyalties. She turned back to him. "I won't leave because someone rejected me, and I won't return because someone regrets it." Darian swallowed hard. "I understand." "No," she said gently. "Not yet." She stepped closer. "You don't need to convince me that you loved me. I believe you did." His shoulders trembled with relief. "But love without honesty is still betrayal." The words struck deeper than any accusation. "You decided my future without giving me the truth. You chose what I should feel. You chose what I should lose." A tear escaped Darian's eye. "I thought hating me would be easier than carrying the burden with me. You didn't trust me enough to decide that for myself." He closed his eyes. She was right. Every painful word. "I can't change what I did," he whispered. "No," Nerissa agreed. "But you can change the man who did it." Silence lingered between them. Then, Darian bowed his head, not as a king, as a man accepting responsibility. "I won't ask you again. When you're ready. If you're ever ready, I'll be waiting." Without reaching for her hand, he turned and walked back toward his horse. Nerissa watched him leave. For the first time since the moon ceremony, she didn't see the Alpha King who had rejected her. She saw a man finally beginning to understand that love cannot survive where truth is withheld. Far behind him, the work of rebuilding continued, and so did the rebuilding of 2 hearts. A year passed. The Moon Kingdom changed in ways no one had thought possible. King Darian kept the promise he had never spoken aloud to Nerissa. He stopped trying to win her back with words. Instead, he changed the kingdom that had once allowed politics to stand above truth. The ancient law giving the royal family power to interfere with the moon bond was abolished. Council seats were open to wolves chosen for wisdom rather than noble birth. Independent courts were established, so no future Alpha or Luna could be separated for political convenience. When the reforms were complete, Darian mounted his horse one final time. He rode alone to Silver Ridge, not wearing ceremonial robes, not carrying a royal escort, simply as Darian, Nerissa was helping children plant young oak trees along the riverbank when she saw him. She smiled politely. "You came. I said I would." Before either of them could speak again, Rowan approached from the nearby fields. The children immediately ran to greet him. After they scattered, Rowan looked from Darian to Nerissa. The silence carried no hostility, only respect. Darian inclined his head. "I owe you more than I can ever repay." Rowan smiled. "You don't owe me. I only did what anyone should." Darian shook his head. "No, you protected her heart when I was the one who broke it." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Rowan turned toward Nerissa. "A year ago," he said quietly, "I made myself a promise. If I ever cared for you, I would never ask you to choose before you were ready." He took a slow breath. "Today you are." He stepped aside. "The only choice that matters is yours." Nerissa looked at both men. One had been written into her life by fate. The other had entered it through kindness. One had shown her how deeply betrayal could wound. The other had shown her that respect could heal. She walked forward slowly, past Rowan, until she stood before Darian. Tears filled his eyes, but he did not reach for her, not this time. Instead, he waited. The choice had to be hers. Nerissa lifted her hand. After a long, quiet moment, she placed it in his. "I am not choosing you because the moon goddess once did." Her voice was steady. "I am choosing you because you spent a year proving that love without honesty is not enough, and then becoming a man who would never make that mistake again." A faint silver glow appeared between their joined hands. The damaged bond shimmered back to life, not as bright as it had been before, stronger, calmer, built upon truth instead of certainty. Darian smiled through tears. "If this bond begins again..." Nerissa finished the sentence. "It begins with truth." He nodded. "No more secrets. No more choosing the kingdom over the woman who makes it worth ruling." Rowan smiled warmly, mounted his horse, and rode toward the western hills. He had not lost. He had honored the freedom of the woman he cared for. And in doing so, he proved that the noblest hearts are measured not by what they claim, but by what they are willing to let choose its own path. 5 years later, the moon ceremony looked nothing like it once had. The great courtyard still glowed beneath silver lanterns. The sacred moonstone still reflected the light of the full moon. But fear no longer lingered among the gathered wolves. Young men and women stood together with hopeful smiles instead of anxious hearts. They knew that whatever the moon goddess revealed, no one could use the sacred bond as a political weapon again. Queen Nerissa had made certain of it. Beside King Darian, she watched the newest generation discover their fated mates. Some laughed, some cried, some simply stood in stunned silence before embracing. Every bond was witnessed not only by the royal family, but by the independent council of elders, whose duty was to protect the rights of every mated pair. The laws they had written together changed the kingdom forever. No alpha could reject, claim, or separate a mate for political gain without a public hearing before the council. No noble family stood above the moon bond, and no common-born wolf could ever again be dismissed because of their birth. The ceremony ended with cheers instead of whispers. As the crowd slowly dispersed, another familiar figure entered the courtyard, Alpha Rowan Thorn. Time had touched his hair with faint streaks of silver, but his warm smile remained unchanged. Darian walked down the palace steps to greet him. "My friend," he said, extending his hand. Rowan accepted it with an easy laugh. "I came to see whether your famous ceremony truly became as peaceful as the stories claim." "And?" Rowan looked around at the smiling families. "I think the stories underestimated it." Nerissa joined them, embracing Rowan like family. "You'll always have a place here." "I know," he replied, "and you'll always have one in Silver Ridge." The friendship between the two kingdoms had become a symbol across the continent. Border disputes faded. Trade flourished. Young wolves traveled freely between the packs, carrying new ideas instead of old prejudices. Later that evening, a group of children gathered around Nerissa beneath the ancient moon oak. One curious boy raised his hand. "Your Majesty, is it true the Alpha King rejected you?" The adults nearby fell silent. Nerissa smiled gently. "Yes," the children gasped. "Weren't you angry?" "I was heartbroken," she admitted. "But sometimes the hardest moments teach us the greatest truths." She glanced toward Darian and Rowan, who were laughing together nearby. "I learned that destiny may introduce two people, but respect, honesty, and freedom decide whether love will remain." The children followed her gaze. One little girl smiled. So choosing each other matters more than being chosen? Nerissa's eyes shone with quiet pride. Exactly. Above them, the full moon bathed the courtyard in silver light, and for the first time in generations, every young wolf standing beneath it believed that whatever destiny offered, their own voice would always matter too. Many years later, the oldest wolves in the kingdom still gathered beneath the ancient moon oak on the night before every moon ceremony. The tradition had begun with Queen Nerissa. Before any new bonds were revealed, the youngest generation would hear one story, not a legend, not a fairy tale, a memory. Children sat in a wide circle while their parents listened from nearby. One little boy raised his hand. Is it true the Alpha King rejected his mate? Nerissa smiled. Yes. The children looked shocked. Then why are you together now? She looked toward Darien, who stood speaking with visiting leaders from neighboring packs. He caught her eye and smiled the same gentle smile he had worn since the day she chose him again. Because, she answered, a fated bond can bring two people together, but only honesty can keep them there. The children nodded thoughtfully. Just then, Alpha Rowan Thorn arrived, with a delegation from Silver Ridge. He had remained one of the kingdom's closest allies through the years. The children hurried over to greet him. One curious girl asked, "Were you really in love with the queen?" Rowan chuckled softly. "I cared for her very much." "Then weren't you sad when she chose the king?" "I was." His answer surprised everyone. But love isn't measured by whether someone chooses you. It's measured by whether you want what's best for them. The children fell silent, considering his words. A short while later, King Darien stepped onto the stone platform beneath the moon oak. He raised a silver goblet. "Before tomorrow's moon ceremony," he said, "there is one man I wish to honor." He turned toward Rowan. "When I failed the woman I loved, another alpha could have used her pain for his own gain. He didn't. He protected her heart until she was strong enough to choose freely." Darien bowed his head. "My greatest rival was never an enemy. He was the man who showed me what true honor looked like." The crowd erupted into applause. Rowan smiled, slightly embarrassed, and inclined his head in return. As the celebration continued, Nerissa looked around at the families filling the courtyard. Young wolves laughed without fearing the moon ceremony. Parents no longer worried that politics would decide their children's futures. The laws had changed. The kingdom had changed. Most importantly, its people had changed. History remembered the night an Alpha King rejected his fated mate. But the kingdom treasured the sunrise that followed. Because another Alpha had not tried to steal her heart. He had protected it. And in doing so, he reminded everyone that destiny may begin a love story, but only truth, respect, and the freedom to choose can give it a happy ending.